Hey everyone, hope you're all going well. Today I'm going to be having a chat about my top 5 home studio essentials. Check it out. Whether you're planning to record, mix or master or any aspect of audio production, setting up a home studio definitely takes some thought. And today I just wanted to have a chat about some of the essential pieces of kit that can really help you get started with your home studio, no matter which area of production you're planning to work on. Well, I'd like to start on the topic that a lot of people tend to ignore, and it's also a much debated topic out there in the recording and music community. Look, I'll have to say that initially, in my own experience, I was of the opinion that acoustic treatment is something that is not required. I was happy with the sound I was getting at the time, and it wasn't until I started delving a little deeper and getting someone that perhaps specializes in acoustics and sound acoustics to do some analysis and find out ways to improve my studio. And even a small amount of acoustic treatment, I was really surprised at how much it can improve your sound. You really need to start with your room, and that's what is going to be your biggest challenge essentially. If you're in a really small room, you don't want big speakers, for example. You're going to have a lot of problems with bass build-up and all sorts of reflecting frequencies off the room. So you need to look at your strategy of how are you going to deal with that. And that's really where acoustic treatment becomes worth its weight in gold. And that doesn't mean just willy-nilly putting foam panels up on random areas in your room. If you can, I definitely recommend you engage a professional acoustics person that can come in and do some room analysis. There are some tools out there that you can use to assess your room and assess how your speakers are representing the sound that's coming out to compensate for the deficiencies of the room. You can do some research. There's a company called SonarWorks that works with those sorts of tools, and a lot of people swear by them. I haven't used them myself personally, and it's not an endorsement of any sort, but it is something that's out there, and a lot of people are really starting to swear by that as well. But getting back to your room, you really need to figure out what are your challenges. The smaller the room, the more odd shaped the room, arguably the more problems you're going to have, and there's a lot of factors which really contribute to it, right down to how many things are stored in the room as well. Each time you store something in the room, you're actually without realizing it affecting the way sound is absorbed or reflected in the room. So have a real think about how you want to set up your room initially, and then you can have a think about how you might need to treat it acoustically. Personally, I think bass treatment is definitely the most important because that can be the most problematic. So you really want to get some bass traps. Bass traps are usually placed in the corners of the room, and the idea is to absorb the low end frequencies and prevent them from sort of bouncing around and causing sometimes phase cancellation as well. You might have a room where maybe you walk around when the music's playing and you can hear some areas where the bass disappears or certain frequencies seem to disappear. That means you've got a dead spot and you're getting some form of phase cancellation in that spot. So that's where you, once again, in your initial setup of the room, your placement of your desk and speakers is really critical. So in summary, with acoustic treatment, if you can get a professional to do an assessment of your room and analyze where you might have some problems to deal with, then you can build a plan for what types of absorption, diffusion, or treatment you might need. Studio monitors or speakers, they are your ears to the music, and choose very carefully. Getting back to what I was saying with acoustic treatment, the size of your room will really dictate the size of the speakers that you should use. If you have a really small room, you don't want to use big massive speakers, because the more you turn up those speakers, the more of a factor your room becomes, because that sound's got to bounce around or escape somewhere, and you're going to have all sorts of problems if you've got really loud, bassy, big speakers in your room. A good set of studio monitors really should give you a nice flat representation of playback. What I'd suggest you do, if you can, is go to a music retailer that sells speakers, and they often will have a room set up with all the different speakers available on the market, and you can plug in your iPhone to the desk there and switch between speakers and get an idea of what each speaker is doing and which one might be the best fit for you. Good idea is to take a playlist of some songs that you know really well and have a good listen to those songs that you do know well through all those different sets of speakers, and definitely start with a speaker size that is going to be appropriate for your room. Depending on what type of recording home studio you're planning to set up, you're probably going to need a couple of microphones to get going. Now, I probably should have prefaced this earlier on in the video to say that I'm making the assumption that you've already got a computer with a DAW and a very basic interface to start you off, because when we're talking about the top 5 home studio essentials, you really can't have a home studio nowadays without some form of computer and interface. So I'm making the assumption that you've already got those things. So getting back to microphones, if you just want to start off with 1 or 2 microphones, you probably need a good dynamic one to start off. Now, dynamic microphones are designed to handle high sound pressure levels. A good example is the SM57. I've got a few of those myself. I use them all the time on things like drums, snare drums in particular. They're great on guitar cabs as well. They're even good on vocals. If you've got a really heavy vocalist that sings really loud, an SM57 can work really well with that sometimes too. They're a fairly inexpensive microphone, readily available at pretty much any retailer or online. So once again, not an endorsement, just one that I tend to use a fair bit and is very common in pretty much all recording studios. If you're planning to record vocals or acoustic guitar, acoustic based instruments, you want a microphone that's got a lot more detail, and that's where a condenser microphone comes in. You don't need to get a top of the range condenser because the price of those can really start creeping up. Consider your budget first, shop around within your budget. A lot of music retailers will even let you try out microphones. You could even try renting one for a while to see if it's going to be useful for you. But you definitely, if you're planning to record vocals and things like that, you want a nice, clean, detailed condenser that's going to capture all of those nuances of the voice and acoustic instruments when you're recording. Headphones, definitely a necessary evil in all studios, home studios of all sorts. Personally, I don't use headphones a lot. I use them definitely during recording and tracking. With things like mixing and mastering, I'm rarely using headphones. I rely on my speakers, my monitors, which do the bulk of my work for me. I may use headphones if I want to pick up some really faint hiss or to hear some different crossfades between things with a bit more accuracy. Usually it's just because of your proximity to the speakers. You might not always be able to hear some of that very faint hiss that you can hear just from the headphones being really close to your ears, and you really get that direct connection to the music. They're really useful in that respect. Definitely when you're recording and tracking, you want to have a decent set of closed back headphones which block out all of the sound and also prevents any bleed, so that you don't hear what's coming out of the headphones onto your recording through your microphone. There's a few different types of headphones. Ultimately, you've got your closed back headphones, which I just described. You've also got open back headphones, which are often used for mixing and things like that, where if you don't have access to studio monitors or speakers, they can be a reasonable compromise. I do hear of a lot of people mixing and mastering on headphones. I wouldn't recommend it as a complete solution, but certainly if you're in a position where you have to use them, then you might want to look at a set of both closed back and open back headphones to sort of cover all bases in that respect. MIDI controllers. Well, you might be asking, what the heck is a MIDI controller? It's simply a device that you use to control virtual instruments inside your DAW. So a good example is a piano keyboard, which I have a couple of those. I've obviously got hardware synths as well, but in terms of a MIDI controller, I've got one that's hooked up to my DAW that I can use to trigger synths, samples, and all those sorts of things. When you're researching MIDI controllers, there are so many to choose from nowadays. It really is becoming an essential part of a home studio because you can, they're so versatile. You can use them for triggering samples. You can use them as a creative tool as well to, to create your own beats and samples and use it as a synth keyboard player as well. So it's really, the sky's the limit with MIDI controllers. You can get small ones that only have a few keys on it if you just need to trigger some drum samples and things like that, or you can get the full-blown 88 key keyboards which will act as a piano essentially. If you're a keyboard player, you can have access to all the different sort of virtual instruments within the DAW when you're recording, and you can do everything through that way. And also, in addition to the sort of keyboard piano style MIDI controllers, you've probably seen people using like a pad where there's all different colored pads on there that light up and trigger all sorts of samples. That's what's called sort of an MPC pad style MIDI controller. A lot of people use them definitely as a creative extension for, building beats and grooves and things like that. They're really good, they're really interactive, and they can really, if you're in your own home studio and you're a producer or you're a budding producer and you're recording and creating your own productions, these sorts of tools can really, get the creative juices flowing if you're into, trigger and sample-based music. Well, I hope that's given you a really good overview of setting up your own home studio and some of the essentials that you need to get going. Certainly feel free to drop me a line or send a comment through if you have any questions. Check out the website mmproductions.com.au and look forward to chatting to you again soon.